All right. So let me just do a quick introduction of you here. And like I said, this is an informal conversation, and this doesn't ever have to see the light of the internet. But I think as we go through this naturally, as we kind of have the conversation, hopefully this becomes something that's worthwhile for both of us, hopefully. And then this is shareable on the internet. So here we go. So today I have Dr. Cody Allen with me. He's a consulting data scientist at Solar Turbines. He received his PhD from University of California at San Diego in mechanical engineering with a focus on controls and optimization. He is also the recipient of the prestigious Robert E. Skelton Systems and Controls Dissertation Award. He has a wide, array of degrees. He has a BS in finance from Northern Arizona University, 2 masters, one from San Diego State in applied mathematics, one from UCSD, University of California at San Diego in mechanical engineering. And of course, I think I mentioned the PhD part. You interned at Solar Turbines, and then now you work there full time. You're also the recipient of the prestigious Caterpillar CEO Award. Congratulations on that and everything else. You worked at Charles Schwab, which is a financial company at one point. You're also a part of a startup creating a web app aiming at optimizing mutual fund portfolios. So you're doing several things at the same time. And you also authored and co-authored several papers in the field of math and turbine technology. And I threw this in there as another one of your achievements, elected as the most outstanding graduate mathematics student for 2015. Man, I really, this is a privilege knowing somebody like yourself. And this is not me just like, starting this off with sugar for you, but this is truly an honor. And I will do my best to kind of make the best of this time. I got to mention for you, Cody, the 3 things I really kind of admire about you. One is the clarity of thought, your breadth of knowledge, and the determination to get things done. And you're able to kind of clarify things so succinctly and just distill it down to like small nuggets of knowledge that you convey to me. And then I just chew on it and I chew on it and then kind of unfolds like an onion. I'm peeling back the layers and when Cody said this and this is what he meant, and I'm going to live up to that ideal, And so anything you have to say after that introduction?
Yeah, wow, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you. And I'm super happy to be here. And I hope I can live up to that introduction now.
I think so. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, we've spoken before. We've spoken before. So I'm very confident that we'll have a fun conversation. Well, let's hope.
I think
so. Unless something completely goes off the rails and
which you never know. But
you never know.
So one quick thing for disclaimer. Yeah. Anything I say here is my own opinion. It does not reflect Solar Turbines or Caterpillar.
Yes, thank you for doing that. Here's a bit of a personal question for you, Cody. Were you always a bright kid growing up? Were you just like brilliant day one, like you went to first grade, top honors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, K through 12? How, kind of walk me through what was your, like, when did people realize, man, this guy is special? Or when did you realize you were special and you just kind of went on to?
Sure. So the answer is no. And there's actually kind of a funny story about this. In high school, in my senior year of high school, they'd have these things called like STAR tests. I think that's what they're called, or that's what they used to be called in California, where it's like basically like the state equivalency test for high school students. Like, how are you doing? How's the school doing? Yada, yada. And it came out, I don't remember how, but it came out that like this test wouldn't affect our grades. And so it was a multiple choice question type test. And so I did the old abacadaba down the entire thing. And so abacadaba only uses ABCD. And the results came back and I tested as not passable to the next grade. Passable.
When you say abacadabra, you're saying you picked A on the first, B on the second one, C on the third, and so forth. Okay.
It just made a pattern on the Scantron. And so it made a really cool looking pattern.
Are you
But
serious?
yeah,
Really? I mean, I mean, as
and
smart as you
so
are today, it's hard to believe that you did something like that. Holy,
yeah,
yeah,
well, there
yeah,
are a lot of shenanigans like that. So
yeah.
I was not a model student growing up by any means, which frustrated my mom because she thought I was pretty smart. But the outside world didn't really get to see any evidence of that.
So is it because you
So
didn't prepare for this, or you're just being a turd or something like that?
no, what it was I was being a turd, and I just didn't care because it didn't affect my grades. So I was like, I'm not going to just take a test for the state of California. So I'm going to do this in 5 minutes, and then I get to go out and have recess or whatever. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, that it created a lot of problems, and so there was a phone call from the principal, and they're like, we're thinking about holding him back.
Wait, so they realized you were just like mailing it in, and then they were like mad, and it's like, we got to let their parents know this kid is just kind of, he's just
Yeah.
kind of not taking it seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. So the way that it worked out is like, because the principal didn't know me super well. So they're like, hey, we are going to talk to your teachers and find out how well you've been doing your classes. And so the teachers were like, yeah, you know, he can at least pass the grade, but he was just being kind of a jerk on the test. And
And
so
how were you
eventually
until
they
that
let me.
point? Like, how were you academically until that point at high school? Like, were you average? Were you above average?
I would say probably below average, to be perfectly honest. I think school was never really all that interesting to me.
Okay.
Um, and like extracurricular stuff was so for example, I started learning electric circuits and programming back in like fifth grade, right? But
Mm,
that was because one of my buddy's dads was an engineer, and over one summer he just taught me all kinds of stuff that back when when it was basic, if you remember that far
right.
back. I'm showing
Yes.
my age a little bit, but yeah, like, so stuff like that was fun, and I did excel at stuff, and I did model rocketry, and would fly rockets and things like that. But school was not a good measure of, I think, my ability or my curiosity, or just in general connectedness with the outside world. I didn't do
Were
very
you
well
good
in.
at that? Were you good at the programming and the electrical circuit stuff, which you learned in fifth grade?
Yeah, I was pretty good. Well, I mean, that's what all mentors will tell you. So whether or not that's true, I have no idea. But I
I
was
mean,
able
did
to
you
complete
enjoy it?
circuits.
But you did
Oh
enjoy it,
yeah,
though.
yeah. It was a blast. I remember one of the original circuits that got me interested was we built an infrared like tripwire kind of a deal. And
Hmm.
so like, when you would go past it, it would buzz. And so
Hmm.
I was thinking, this is fifth grade, and I was like, oh, I can put this in the hallway that goes down to my bedroom, and I'll know when my parents are coming in case I'm doing anything in my bedroom that I shouldn't be doing. And
Yeah.
so, because like there were curfews on how you could play video games or how long you could play video games, and so it would give you just enough time to hit the power button and turn around and open up a book. So in that respect, I feel like I was doing pretty well. But as far as school goes, not so good. I'd say average, below average, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's it's such a rascally mentality, and it's endearing. Obviously, I'm sure your parents got a kick out of it, or maybe not. They were
Pissed
kind
my
of mad
mom
at
off
you.
so much. Yeah, she
You
was always
pissed. Oh,
angry.
okay. But she knew that you had a higher IQ, or maybe IQ towards something that was engineering or math or some of the smarter subjects or something like that, so that she didn't did she worry about you that you would. Okay, come back to that story you were telling me about the star test. So we started there, I guess. So you got
So
that call, or
basically,
your mom got
right.
the call? Yeah.
She was pissed again, and she's like, "Here I am hearing about your other friends, and oh, they're testing in, and like it's looking very good for them, blah blah blah. And then here my kid is, who's testing like well below average, and she's like, you're embarrassing me, blah blah blah."
Wow.
And so I kind of felt bad about that. But it's not like they retest you, and so it was just kind of like went on my record. But luckily, it didn't influence college or anything like that. And at that point, I think that was maybe like the first moment where I was like, all right, maybe I should take a little more interest. So then, so that was my senior year, I think. And I get to college, my undergrad, and the very first year I was an astronomy major, and I switched over to business after the first year because generally it just the bug had not struck me yet of like science and STEM areas as far as like a scholastic effort. And so business was relatively easy comparatively, right? And
Yeah.
so I
I don't
continued
know.
to
I guess. Yeah. I
it,
didn't
well,
know
I
if
can
business easier?
I think so. There's a
Okay.
lot less math and there's a lot less physics,
Okay.
and those tend to be the harder subjects for most people. And
Okay.
so, I did fine with the math, but at the first year you don't get into anything pretty, advanced or anything. But I ended up still going over to business and kind of just scooting on through, same thing, like not applying too much effort, but still
Hmm.
getting passing grades and being all right. And my grades were good enough to get a scholarship each year, which was nice.
Hmm.
Um, and then let's see. So then I graduated, and it was working at Charles Schwab that I got put on a team with a bunch of people, but there was one guy in particular who was a bit of a go-getter.
Hmm.
And he had a buddy who also worked at Schwab that was also a go-getter. And I don't even remember how it happened, but like we started talking about finance and backgrounds and yada yada. And it came out that they were going to be studying for the CFA, which is the Chartered Financial Analyst exams.
Hmm.
And so that's a pretty big designation in the finance world.
Hmm.
Um, and so they asked me if I wanted to study with them because I had a finance degree. I was like, I guess, well, this is a good way to make friends and we'll see kind of how it goes.
Hmm.
So we ended up doing it, and it ended up being way more intense than I expected. And for a while there, I was not so sure. I was like, I don't know about this, but some sort of magic happened during that time. And like all of a sudden, I actually started really enjoying the more complex things, and it just started to resonate. And like maybe it was the right people, and like our little study groups, we would meet every weekend and we would do, tests and work on questions. And then we would study independently throughout the week. But like it was rigid and it was good. And it really created kind of like a nice atmosphere of kind of just academic achievement. Like that was the goal. Like we wanted to pass these tests, and the tests are only offered once a year. You get one chance, and if you miss it, you have to wait another year to be able to take that test.
Hmm.
And so, like, we took it pretty seriously. And so, I'm looking at these guys. I'm like, these guys are way smarter than me, and it's going to be really hard. And I don't know, it's going to be really embarrassing if they both pass and I fail. And so that kind of drove me to try a bit harder than I would normally try, I think. Just like really a fear of just being labeled as an idiot. And
Hmm.
I didn't want that. And it was like, I'm going to lay it all out. I'm going to hope for the best. And I hope that like I've got enough to like just skimp by. And so test time comes, and turned out I did pretty well.
Hmm.
And so I passed. We all passed. So that was great. And like, that was the first time I think that I had what I call my own personal intellectual awakening. And I was like, maybe I'm a little smarter than I let on. And maybe I can do some interesting stuff. Like maybe, some of these areas in life that I thought just weren't accessible to me, perhaps they are. And so then we went through, the next test for the next year, worked on it. And I ended up doing really well. And I got one of the highest scores. And I beat our whole study group, which surprised everyone, myself included.
Hmm.
And at that point, like, these were two guys that I really looked up to and I thought were just brilliant, brilliant dudes.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, shoot, like if I can apply myself and be at the same level as them, maybe I can do something interesting. And around that time, I started really enjoying the mathematics that were like coming up in the economics sections. And with the CFA, they would kind of scratch the surface of model building and how to represent different things, applied math type problems, but they wouldn't go very far. It's like, basis level of statistics, basis level of like algebra, and maybe even some pre-calculus, but very little calculus involved. And so it scratches the surface just enough to let you know, like you can do these things to make forecasts and stuff like that. But then like it would back off and say, if you want to know more, like, go get an economics degree or go do some math or something like that. And one of the guys was really starting to encourage me to take some more math classes at the local community college. And he's like, if you're interested and you want to learn more, go take a community course. I was like, that's a great idea. So I did. So I went back to school at nights, and I was like, I'll give it a try and see, like, is this worth my time? Do I actually want to do this, or am I just kind of fooling myself?
Mm.
And so I did that for a year, took a few classes, and this was back in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I took calculus 1 there, which I hadn't done I took like a business calculus in college in undergrad. And so, it's a watered down version. So I took the real thing there. And I just got lucky enough to have a ASU PhD student as my instructor. And she was really cool. And so I think she saw that I was curious and hungry. And so she would work with me after the class on like more advanced subject material and kind of give me like an honors version of the class. But even though it wasn't for credit, it was like, here's what you would be doing in later classes, and like here are some of the harder problems. And I think between that and the 2 guys that I was working with for the CFA, it really, I don't know, it just brought something out in me. And then from then on, like, that's when I started to really go for the more like STEM based areas.
With these 2 people that you were studying with, did they teach you how to study, or was it just you realized you had a high IQ so you could pick concepts up quickly? And there's the reason I'm asking you this question is I had a similar trajectory in my undergrad. I did really poorly in my first. I did my undergrad back in India in electrical engineering. In my first, second, and third semesters, I did extremely poorly, and then I met with this one guy, who was better than me academically. And for whatever reason, he said, let's study together. The fourth semester back in India, it's all very regimented. You can't really pick your courses. The fourth semester's subject, the portfolio of subjects or the courses you had to pass were all common for everybody. And so he said, it's hard to do. Let's do it together, whatever. And that was the first time I kind of really learned how to study. And even then I learned only to study just rote memorization. I didn't even study to understand the concepts, to kind of, actually break down something into its parts and understand what it is. I just understood that this is how you get grades. I mean, that's how bad I was. I was just like kind of lost. I was just didn't have any direction, and I was doing terribly. So that's why I ask you this question is like, did you also learn how to think? Did you learn how to learn? Or was it just you kind of saw how they learn and you mimicked it? How did that go?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was a combination of the 2 of what you just said. So 1, that was the first time I had seen anybody do extra problems and extra work for studying, right? Like, like my whole undergrad, the people I surrounded myself with were probably about on my same level. And like we would do what was required by the teacher or whatever, but very rarely was there additional work that you assigned to yourself and did for your own enrichment, right? And so with these guys, it wasn't like that. And they were both excellent students, by the way, in their undergrad. They both excelled. They were like top of the class. I think one of them graduated like valedictorian in math for undergrad, or summa cum laude. I don't remember. There's some distinction, but like he was very good. And the other one did really well, and he was an economics guy. And so, both had kind of, I would say, degrees that do require a lot of thinking and a lot of perseverance and studying. And that's not to say that finance doesn't, but I just think it's not the same. So that said, yeah, like it was seeing them study and like kind of learning, especially those first few weeks that we got together, and like seeing what they would do and how they would approach problems and how they would continue going past like the recommended problems and just doing problems. I'm like, why are you doing all this extra work? And they're like, this is how you get better. You continue to work and come at it from all angles and do all the problems you can get your hands on to make sure you really understand those concepts. And so that was the second thing too, is like, the realization that oh, if you just dictate that you're going to spend an hour studying or like an hour and a half studying, it's not time based, it's
Mm.
value based, right? Like, what are you getting out of it? And when have you gotten that value that you need? It could be 30 minutes and you have that aha moment, or you could be beating your head against the wall for 3 hours until it comes, or maybe it doesn't even come that day. And maybe the next day you have to get it. It was kind of that like disconnection of time and value and investment into yourself intellectually. And I think that definitely came from them. And I think it was, eye-opening for me to see how people who I looked at and I was like, wow, these are really, really intelligent people. And this is how they're doing it. And this is most certainly not how I've done it. So I'm going to try this.
Mm.
and, and it was a
Has the
little rocky.
what's that?
I said it was a little rocky at first, like that
Yeah.
realization that you've been doing it wrong for a long time. And, like it's going to require a lot more effort. You're like, do I
Right.
really want this? But if you do, it does pay dividends eventually, but it just takes extra time, extra dedication, I suppose.
Yeah, quick story on that was I was doing so poorly until my fourth semester. I'm tempted to lean into all of this, but I probably shouldn't at the same time. In my fifth
Oh, go
semester,
ahead.
this is well, I was doing badly. I was getting Fs and things like that. And in my fifth semester, it was the first time I passed all courses and I actually topped what a couple of courses in my class. And I remember calling my dad, with the with the news. Because he's always on the phone. He wants to know what happened. You went to the university, and then you looked up. There would be these old dot matrix printout. I mean, I'm talking the 90s here. Okay, so pardon me here, it's Cody.
No. I love hearing this. Bring me back.
Yeah, so it was this kind of like, it would be in a notice board. It would be kind of dot matrix printout, and then you would look at your name, and then you would see a F or P or whatever. Only if you had passed everything, you would have a P there at the end. Otherwise, even one, if you had an F, it would be an F. So I got a pass, and then I did well and stuff. So I called my dad anyway, and I'm giving him the news, right? So he's like, he's in disbelief. He's in absolute disbelief. He said, so these were his words. He's like, you passed everything. Are you sure? And I'm saying, yes, I passed it all at one shot. All at one shot.
I have my P.
I got my P. All at one shot meant that, you didn't have to like take the course again and to get a P again. And then you would, back clear that backlog. It was called backlog, colloquially, in India. And so,
Awesome.
yeah, anyway, so that was the first time. And so that became a habit. And then thank God I continued on there, and I got somewhere with my life. But anyway, that's a great story, Cody. And so as your trajectory goes, so you finished your bachelor's and you got interested in the field of mathematics at that point. And then where did you go from there? Or how did you go from there? I guess where and how did you get there?
Yeah. So now there's like an interesting divergence, I suppose. Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not. But so what happens, as I mentioned, I take that next CFA test and it goes well. During that time, I was also taking, starting to rack up math courses at the local community college at night. And so I think I got through calculus 1, which is quite low on the totem pole as far as math goes, like for a math degree, right? These are pretty introductory classes still. And I got the idea in my head that I was like, you know what? I can go get a degree in math. And I think that's what I'm going to do. And it was crazy and not, I wouldn't say it was grounded in any real reality other than I just felt like I could do it and I wanted to.
Just a whim, on a whim, you wanted to do a math degree, or did you think you were?
It wasn't. No, so the way it went was I really enjoyed the CFA material and finance in general, especially like investments. And I was like, if I ever want to get to Wall Street and work there, then I've got to up my game in math because, like all of the quants, as they call them, the quantitative traders and quantitative analysts, they've all got at a minimum a master's degree in math, right? And most of them are PhDs for that matter. And so I was like, this is the only way I can get there. And that's at that time in my life. And that was in the early, that would have been right around the time of the great, what was it? The financial recession of
2008. Yeah.
2001, Great Recession. And so I was working at Schwab in 2008 on the phones, talking to people during the day as like the market was just tanking. And then in the evening, either taking math courses or working on the CFA. And yeah, like after around 2010, that was when I was like, there's only one way I can do this. And I've got to quit my job and I've got to go back to school full time to make up, everything I missed and then try to get another job. And so I called up my parents and I asked them, can I move back into my old childhood bedroom and live with you guys while I go to school? And so they said yes. And I was like, awesome. And so I ended up coming back to San Diego and I just started taking courses. Like basically I had built an Excel spreadsheet for 3 years. And in those 3 years, the way I did it was I looked at a number of different programs at different schools, like top schools, to see what was required for a bachelor's degree in math. And I figured if I could get most of those knocked out in community college, and then by auditing courses at I think it was Cal State San Marcos and SDSU, then if I could show I had those and that I had passed those courses, then maybe I could get admitted into a master's program. That was the thought process. So I created my Excel spreadsheet, and I just started going through the list, taking courses at the local community colleges until I got to the upper division courses. And then I had talked to the dean at Cal State San Marcos and SDSU, and I said, here's what I'm trying to do, and can I audit courses for credit? Like, will you allow me to do that? And they said, sure, you pay a fee and we'll let you sit in and we'll treat you like a real student. And I said, okay, awesome. So I did that for another year. And then at that point, I had made, some good connections and I got a couple of letters of recommendations from some of those professors. And that's how I got to my master's degree at San Diego State University. So I applied and was accepted. And they knew that I still needed to do one more year of kind of like essentially a senior level bachelor's degree in mathematics. So still undergrad courses. And then the next 2 years were the actual graduate courses. And so that's kind of how that went through. The whole
Did you
time,
enjoy it? Did you enjoy doing all of that? Did you actually enjoy the journey? You loved it? Okay.
I did. I wouldn't change it. Like I worked as so during the day I'd go to class, and then at night I'd work as a waiter at a local burger restaurant. And that's how I was able to fund all of this. And then I also had, at some point when I got into SDSU, I got some like a grant for tuition, which was really helpful because I was below the poverty line. So it was nice to be able to get that kind of support from California. And then so that plus the waiting, tips, whatever, was enough to pay for gas to commute there and buy my books and stuff like that. And again, I was living at home, so kind of subsidized by mom and dad, which was very helpful. But yeah, like the journey was great. Like I met so many different people, so many different walks of life. And like, it's a weird experience because taking classes at different community colleges and then at different colleges and kind of bundling it all together, most people I don't think get that experience. And it just, a lot of people just have like a 4-year degree experience like I had for my undergrad. But like the whole bundled thing across multiple places, across multiple departments, it was just really interesting to see, you get a lot of cross-pollination with different people, different walks of life. And I really enjoyed that. Like I met a lot of people, and some of those people I'm still in contact with and hang out with, which is cool. And then did that answer the question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. What is applied math? Maybe you brought it up. Like, what I always wanted to ask you this question, like it's a rookie question, but what is it useful for? Is it for like the Wall Street kind of jobs that you're talking about? Like you can use math to optimize somebody's portfolio, let's say. Is that the primary purpose of?
That would be, yeah, definitely like one application. I'd say the difference between pure math and applied math is, in pure math, you're proving theorems about things. You're in subjects like, complex analysis, real analysis, modern algebra, or abstract algebra, as it's sometimes called. And like going deep into those subjects, and you're proving a lot of theorems. And then, and that's just a very small subset of the areas. But in the applied side, you're usually a little bit more concerned with solving problems that have some sort of a basis in physics or economics or sociology, epidemiology. Like there's some basis, there's some problem that people want to solve. And, oftentimes where applied mathematicians come into play is they are there as a bridge to help scientists that don't have the mathematical training, but they have an interesting problem to solve, right? So like you could be a biologist or a chemist, or physicists typically have enough math under their belt that they can solve their problems. But in some of the other sciences, and it may be helpful to have an applied mathematician that helps you along and solves the problem. And then also on the other side, looking at computation, theory of computation, how do you make things more efficient computationally? And yeah, it's kind of like it's an interesting little mix somewhere, not necessarily pure math, but not necessarily pure science. And it's like, where's the math that is somewhere in that intersection, and how do we solve those problems from a math point of view?
Wow. And did you, I'm sorry?
I was just going to say that's kind of my interpretation after being through a program.
Yeah. Did you like, when you were going through these courses, I mean, I think you mentioned this earlier, but were you continuously kind of wowing yourself like, my God, I could do these hard things? Or was it just like you had at that point, your confidence was so high up, like you had a chip on your shoulder? I could do this, man. I could do applied math. I could take courses in the evening. I could just crush everything. How was that? Like, or was it just like, progressively got better?
I think so. I don't think it was like that at all. I think, there were a lot of smart people in all of the classes. And I always felt like, one, I did feel like I had something to prove, because I was almost always the oldest person in the class, right?
Oh.
And I was like, I don't want to be this old person that's just kind of like dragging the class down. Like I want to be here and like actively in it, and at least, hopefully middle of the pack. And, I tended to rise towards the top in a lot of classes, but there are so many reasons that could be the case. Like maybe I put more time into it. Maybe, somebody else had grandma who was ill and couldn't study as much for that test, or, like it's a myriad of reasons that could lead to that. And not necessarily that I'm just smarter than everybody, right? And I'm very aware of that. And I try to remind myself that, like, you're not the smartest person. Don't think that, because there's always going to be somebody else out there that's way smarter than you. And at least that's what I tell myself. So
is it that insecurity that still drives you, or you think something else drives you today?
There's definitely that's a rough question. Thanks, Reggie.
Is it no, I don't mean to characterize insecurity. My bad. It's not insecurity. I take that back.
Well, but there's some truth to that, right? Like, there's this fear of failure.
Yeah,
I think that is a real thing. Like I think about that on a daily basis in my job. Like
you do,
at Solar and some of the projects I work on, I think about like, I've got to get this right, because there's a lot of money riding on it. There's a lot of expectation riding on it, customer expectation, things like that. And just in general, like you don't want to look like a fool. And like people will start questioning, should you be working here? Should you be in this industry? Are you sure that
you've already proved yourself? You've got a PhD and you have double masters and all of that. You still have that like driving insecurity underneath it all. It's amazing.
It's yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a character flaw, but
it's
definitely something that
I bring that up because I don't know, maybe this is like, you look at the landscape of people who've achieved big things, and then I often wonder, is it that these folks kind of like, they have this kind of high self-esteem that they're progressing through life because they've just kind of proven themselves before, maybe through a PhD or a business that they've created that's done extremely well. But then I think to me, it's the reason why I'm kind of, I guess, pointing that out, to me, underlining that, is that it's an ongoing journey. You don't like sort of sit on the laurels that, or at least as an outsider, I look at a person like you and I think, my God, you must have like self-esteem at that level. Like you're just crushing it every day, and you continue to crush it. I laid out all the achievements early on, and that's not even like, I don't know, 10% of what you've achieved, I'm sure. How do you,
That's most of it. It's
so no, come
yeah,
on,
no,
don't be
you
humble.
got it all.
Yeah. How do you anyway, so that's why I kind of bring it up, is that like you help normalize that kind of sentiment, that you always have like this kind of like, something to prove. I just don't walk around with a chip on my shoulder. There's a humility attached to it, and you want to always work hard and wake up every day and have that kind of drive you every day, that, hey, I don't want to look like a fool, or I don't want, there's a lot riding on this, and there could be the slightest chance that something could go sideways, given all of the effort I'm putting in. So I better be on the top of my game all the time. And it's like, it's a lesson I always like hold on to, man. It's easy. I mean, I don't know how you look at it, but somebody from the outside looking in, I look at somebody like yourself, and I think that's fantastic. That's just like the attitude you approach every day. Like you were saying, a lot riding on what you're working on and things like that. That's good to know, because that's a great way of approaching life. But anyway, keep going. So you were talking
Well,
about,
okay, I in case
don't mean to get off all on this
yeah, no, it's,
philosophical.
but I will say this, like,
yeah,
I certainly do have a little bit of an ego, and
yeah.
I'm aware of that too. Like, don't.
Why do you say
it's
so?
not
Why
like,
do you say so?
I don't know. I mean, as time has gone on, and like as I work through problems and stuff like that, like there is a realization at some point you're good at solving problems, right? Like when you continually solve problems well, and those solutions tend to exceed other solutions that other people have, you take notice. And again, like it's not to say, like, I'm well aware of the fact that like there are plenty of super smart people out there, and there are probably people that could do what I'm doing better. And that's just kind of an operating assumption I have. But that doesn't mean I can't do really well, right? Like those two, they're not mutually exclusive. And so, you get some of that over here, but then you can have a little bit of an ego over here, and you try to, the moment you think you're the best, absolute best, nobody can beat you, that's when you're really going to get beat, right? And so it's not a healthy mindset to have. And I do, recognize, or I try to remind myself that on a daily basis. Like there's always room for improvement. You can always grow. You can always learn. Don't, like you said, rest on your laurels. Like keep going and keep trying to solve problems, and do the best you can. Like that's the most anybody can ask of you, is to just do the best you can and not half-ass it, so to speak. Like, oh man, can I go on a tangent here for a moment?
Yes, please.
So this whole idea of quiet quitting, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
I've had some talks with some of my management about that, and I've heard differing definitions. So the definition I've heard the most is kind of like you just stop caring at work. And so that's kind of what I'm operating under as I talk here. But like, it kind of frustrates me personally, because it's like, if you are not happy in your job, or you don't feel a connection with your job and your employees and your business, where like you do want to try to strive while you're at work, then why are you there? Like go find something that's a better fit for you. And so it frustrates me a little bit, because I don't feel like I'm a quiet quitter. I think that, I am trying to push the business, and I'm trying to push myself, and I want other people to feel that way as well. Right. And so, like, it's just a weird thing. And like, I've had a bunch of people randomly talk to me about this in the last, I'd say, month and a half, where it's become like kind of a thing.
Really?
And the first time I heard it, I had to go to the internet, and I was like, what is this? And so like, I read a few different definitions, and like, it's just kind of frustrating. Like like I get it. So the other definition, let me go there. The other definition that I've seen that I do like is like, it's not necessarily that you don't care or you're not going to try. It's just that you're going to have good boundaries between work and the rest of life. And like that part, I fully agree with. Like, yes, you should have good boundaries and make time for your family and make time for your friends and make time for your hobbies and like enjoy life. I mean, I don't know what your feelings are, but as far as I know, I'm only going to live once. And, once it's done, it's done. And so I think of that like, I want to spend time with my dogs. I want to spend time with my wife. I want to spend time with my friends and family. And yeah, like it's good to have boundaries. But the whole idea of like just not caring about your job and not trying, I don't like that. And I don't think that's a healthy mindset to have.
The way I saw the whole quiet quitting thing, it's you just do the bare minimum that is asked of you in the job to kind of hold on to your job, and then you don't do anything beyond that. And the way I looked at that was, you had COVID come through, and then you had like this anti-work kind of movement, and you had all this news come out that companies are making profits hand over fist, and they're still treating their employees badly. And it was kind of a product of that cynicism that this quiet quitting came along. And I can see that angle to things. Not that I endorse it. It's just that I could see. I mean, you get on Reddit, which is, sometimes it could be the cesspool of the internet. Sometimes it could be insightful, but you can see some people lay out the argument as to why, we shouldn't be working for the man and, burning ourselves up. And I don't know. I'm with you though. It's like you look at. I mean, I look at work as though it's and again, this is not me virtue signaling or anything like that. This is genuinely me. It is a means of transforming yourself and discovering yourself, and not to sound cheesy or anything like that. That's the way I've always approached work. It's like it has to bring out the best in you, as well as you're learning more about the world, as well as you're learning more about yourself. Socrates learn, know thyself kind of deal. And so I don't know. I struggle with that too. I wonder though. I wonder how much of it is pervasive in society, or is it just a meme that kind of like people are throwing out there, and just it's tacit permission to just kind of mail it in,
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't know. I would have a month and a half ago, I would have said, "What are you even talking about?" But now, with multiple people at my work coming up to me and asking me if I've heard about this and like what my thoughts are on it, and that's the only reason I even have an opinion, is because people started asking me what I think, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is. I need to think about it.
They're looking to you, Cody. They're like, well, if he's kind of mailing it in, I could mail it in.
Maybe so. I'm like, but I'm not mailing it in. Like, keep working, people. But
yeah, I'm kidding.
It's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing, and it's I think it's more than just a meme. Like, I just keep seeing it so much, and to actually see it in my own workplace was surprising after I realized what it was. But
wait, you're saying you're actually seeing that phenomenon play out at work, that people are sort of quiet quitting?
It's hard to say, because most of us we're still remote, or a lot of us are still remote. But like, you do wonder, right? Like, how much time are you actually putting into work when nobody's around? And I don't know. I mean, like, I'm certainly not going to point any fingers at anybody, because I don't have the facts. But like, it makes you start to wonder. And then when you have a few select people that, like, I would say are people who are most certainly not quiet quitters, but like more of go-getters, asking me what they think or what I think about this idea and this phenomenon, and is it a problem here? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, maybe it is. Maybe we need to be more aware of this. Maybe management needs to be aware of this. I'm not sure. But at the same token, I don't want to give management more fodder for being able to lay people off or anything like that.
Be more draconian.
I am not a manager, and so like, there's always that kind of dichotomy.
Are you quiet quitting, Cody? Are you quiet quitting? I hear that you're quiet quitting.
I hope that my output shows that is not the case. That's
right.
A goal of mine. Yeah. So, but it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it could be a reflection, just like you said, of mistreatment of employees by employers. And if that is the case, and if there are a lot of situations where that's occurring, like, then good. Like, we need something to kind of rewrite the ship.
Yeah.
And if that's what this is, then I'm all for it, in the sense that yeah, I mean, like if this is a cultural shift, then I'm not going to participate personally. I'm going to keep working hard, but that's because
Yeah,
I think I have a good employer that, cares. But
right.
if there are employers out there that don't care, then certainly like I can understand that point of view and the need for that. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe we're in the midst of a cultural shift, and perhaps it's going to be really good for employees.
Hmm. Hmm. I agree. I agree. Um, Going back to your earlier point, I wanted to ask you, about the point about your ego and things like that. Do you ever have any inner demons that you have to fight, that you fight on a regular basis, or there have been moments along your career where you've had certain inner voices or certain kinds of self-doubt that you had to overcome, and how did you do that if you had to deal with it?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say there are certainly times, and the most concrete example I can give you is solving when you're trying to solve hard problems. And for me, that's like, typically some sort of a math problem related to either work or research. And so, like during my PhD years, there was this one problem that we worked on, myself and my thesis advisor and my dissertation advisor. And man, this thing took 2 years to actually get a solution to.
Mm,
And it ended well, and we got a publication, and it was a nice publication in a nice, pretty well established math journal, so that was cool. But like there were days, nights, weeks throughout where I just wanted to throw in the towel, and I was ready. And luckily I had a really good advisor, and he kept pushing me. He's like, no, we're not done yet, like there's still more here, keep going, keep going. And I was like, I am so done with this problem. I don't want to think about it anymore. Like we're clearly not making progress. And at this point, we're just wasting time, and like we're just adding years on to the PhD. And yeah, so like, you talk about the inner demon or demon, and yeah, I mean, I definitely think that exists. And it can, when you beat your head against something and there's just no progress or even backwards, like you're going backwards or you feel like you're going backwards, like that amplifies that demon, right? And
mhm.
it's hard to overcome that. And I think for me, my support system was really good. Like my wife was really good, and she would help support, and then my advisor was really good, and he would help support. And both were like continually giving positive feedback, like stick with it, you're almost there, like make baby steps, keep going.
Mm.
And for me, like that was super important for me. And so I mean, for somebody that didn't have a support system, I don't even know what they would do. Like I don't know that I could have done what I don't think I could have finished it had I not had that.
The inner demon being kind of self-doubt that maybe you're not going to get there. It's more towards yourself, or is it more external where you're like, this is too hard of a problem that's not worth
Oh
my
no,
time?
it's most certainly a little like it's like the little devil on your shoulder says, "You're
Mm.
not smart enough to figure this out. You should
Wow.
stop. You're
Okay.
too stupid, and you should stop. You're wasting everybody's time."
Okay. Okay. That's glad you clarified that. That is an inner demon for sure.
It is. It is. And like,
Yeah.
but like that, it goes to that whole imposter syndrome too, right? Like,
Mm,
I mean, I've definitely felt that so many times where it's like, you shouldn't be here. Why are you here? You're not good enough to be here. You shouldn't be getting the salary level that you're at. You're not good enough. Like that happens a lot. And I don't know if other people get that a lot, but
even
like
to this
certainly
day, even to this day, you would say?
I would say it's a little less like I said, like eventually as you get through enough, like you start to take notice, and like you start to feel like, okay, maybe I should be here.
Mm,
Maybe I am a good problem solver or whatever. But like as you enter new situations and you're presented with even harder problems and more complex problems, like it's this kind of cycle, right? Like you're like, oh man, I just made it to the next rung up, and now I've got this new set of business problems, so to speak, that they want me to solve. And it's like, dang it, I'm not good enough to be here. Like I need to take a step back. Like somebody else surely is better than me. And then you just got to dig in and start trying to solve problems.
I mean, you're normalizing so much at the moment, like, because I'm thinking, like, dude, you've got a double master's, PhD, all of that stuff. You're in California, you're inventing, disrupting, fill in the blank, right? And then you have this kind of like imposter syndrome and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, and I I'm completely with you on that. It's just like it's normalizing a lot of things. What was I going to say? Yeah, one of the things I heard about, again, this is maybe a tangent, maybe not, about confidence and that imposter syndrome thing. Like I was watching somebody talk about this recently, and they were saying the one way to get over it is to really prove it to yourself. It's like, confidence is not something that, people say you have to sort of fake it till you make it, all of that stuff. And it really comes down, and it resonated with me every time. You have to prove it with the small wins in your life that you are capable of doing X, and you have to constantly prove that to yourself. It is a material outcome. It is not just something in your head that just embedded the idea in your head that you're confident, you're just, bravado and all of that. You're just gonna, puff up your chest and walk around. It is really rooted in actual wins. You have to get the W's, enough of them, and then you say to yourself, okay, I think I'm worth my salt to some degree, and then I could get this stuff done. I don't know what you think about that. Like, do you ever like walk into a situation where I don't know, I think the answer is probably no, is what I'm guessing, where you're not so confident. Anyway, I was going to quote an example from our common friend, but I won't. But our mutual friend. Anyway, so going back, I don't know if you had anything to add there, Cody. Go ahead.
So going back to what you said, like, you've got to get a certain number of wins. I think there's some truth to that, but I think it's super subjective, and it will be different for every single individual, is my guess. Like, I couldn't tell you what my number is of like, here are the wins that I have to have before I feel confident. And I don't even know how you would be able to describe that with any type of structure other than like just an idea that notionally you can work towards, but that is not ever like strict in the sense that like it's 50, it's 65, right? Like, I don't think that number exists. And so, yeah, I like the idea, whoever said that or wherever it's coming from. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I don't fully buy into it. Just personally, I think, at some point, yes, you will start to feel confident, but if you continue to push yourself, it's going to be like, kind of think of a sine wave, right? Like, you hit the peak here and then you push yourself and now your confidence goes down because now you're working on a harder problem. And so, you just kind of are going to oscillate back, and hopefully like your oscillation amplitude is small and you're at a nice little like confidence level already. But life can throw all kinds of curveballs, and
Absolutely,
I think any good curveball can completely derail your confidence, whether it's true or not. At least like kind of a transient shaking of the confidence until you find yourself on firm footing again.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been through something like that myself recently, where the first, I would say, 14 or 15 years of my career, where at CAT, like, that was one of the things. And by the way, whatever I'm saying here, again, I have to put the disclaimer that you did earlier. It's not indicative of the views of the company. These are my personal views. And so anyway, so I had this kind of riding high confidence, from the previous gigs that I'd had, and the achievements and the accomplishments and the recognitions and so forth. And then, as you were saying earlier, you take on harder and harder roles. You want to challenge yourself, and that's one of the things I did to myself. And I felt like I hit that point where it was, I mean, it was a combination of the team I was working with the gig that was at hand, and I mean, I would come back home from work and just ruminate. Just rumination became the way I spent my evenings. It's a horrible way to live, because you're just kind of like parsing through what happened during the day. Man, I was considered smart. I was considered, not an idiot, but here I am proving that I'm an idiot. And
Did you ever journal as part of your rumination?
I did. I do a lot of like voice journals, as well as I do this 5-minute journal thing. 5-minute. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of that 5-minute journaling, but or the Tim Ferriss is a big fan of that, but I bought into that, and I would journal this, in the mornings, and I still do a lot of voice logging.
What exactly is that? Can you describe that for the listeners?
Sure, yeah. So the 5-minute journal,
And me.
I guess, what's that? And you?
I said and me because I don't know what it is.
Yeah. You can buy this book, by the way. You could go on Amazon. It's a book with the templates of a 5-minute journal. So it's every day.
Okay.
You fill out, like, there's 3 sections for the morning and 2 sections for the night. So in the morning, you kind of you write 3 things for gratitude. You're going to write 3 things what you're going to get done by the end of the day, and then the next 3 things are what would make you happy if you got these 3 things done, or something along those lines. And then at the night you would journal back and say, what went well, what could go to, you just kind of like reviewing the day. What could you have done better? And so it's just like 5 sections like that laid out. It's meant to be 5 minutes, and I would only do it once a day. You're supposed to do it twice a day. I only do it once a day, where fill out the morning part of it, and then the following day I would fill out the previous night's thing, and then I would fill out the morning. So it would go like that. But my voice logs I felt like I've transitioned more into that. So I used to oscillate between the 5-minute and this. The voice logs are like more detailed. I kind of, really kind of summarize my thoughts over the last few days. It helps kind of knowing what my thoughts are. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, it's a journal you could buy, and you could write down. And there was a lot of crying tears into my journals, during those months and years. But at the end of it, certainly, it was a great experience, in the sense that, you look back and say, okay, these were clearly my blind spots. I needed to really be cut to the bone and be showed that I'm capable of these things. These things I really have to work hard at. And embarrassment, like professional embarrassment, is a real, it's just a bitch. It's so hard. I never had experienced that, and to go through that, and to experience that, and to come out the other end. I mean, I'm sure there'll be many more moments in my life. I hope they'll be less intense, but in any case, it's something that I needed to experience, and I experienced it, and I'm thankful for it, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, can we get back to your trajectory of education? I'm always fascinated by that.
Sure.
So let's get into your. So you did your master's in applied mathematics, and then you also got a master's in electrical engineering, right?
No, mechanical.
Mechanical engineering. So, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so where I guess we left off on the story was, so I finished up my last year of the master's degree in math is when I came into contact with Solar Turbines, and I always think this is a funny story. I was working at like a SAT prep institution. SAT prep being for like high schoolers going to college. Back, I don't even know if they still do it or not, if they still use SAT scores or not, but a ways back they did. Mm-hmm. And so I was there, and I was at a college party, or sorry, not a college party, a Christmas party for the company. Mm-hmm. And one of the people that I taught with, a different teacher, was there, and she sat me down next to her husband and said, the two of you should talk. And so her husband happened to work for Solar Turbines, and he started asking me some questions, and we were talking about some interesting areas of applied mathematics and projects I was working on. And at the time we were kind of doing a project on how autopilot works. Mm-hmm. And so autopilot for airplanes. Mm-hmm. And so I was describing like the stuff I had done and the code I had written to be able to, actually find optimal points for, a given reference trajectory, and yada.
sorry to interrupt you, but how did you get into, how did your interest, what led you to doing that? Like writing, math stuff for autopilot? Like what motivated you to get into that?
That was a class project for a numerical optimization
Okay.
course I was in. And so, the question was, how do you, it was like a take on control theory of how do you control this physical device
Mhm.
given some goal that you have, right? Like that's kind of
Mhm.
control theory in a nutshell. And it was looking at different optimization routines that could achieve that and stability of the routines and things of that nature. And it was like a, end of class project. And so it was, I like airplanes, I like things that fly. And so
Mhm.
that was the project I chose. And so I was just describing to him, here's the stuff that I've been doing, and here's like what I've been looking at, and here's how I coded it up and all of that. And
Mhm.
so solar turbines, for those who don't know, they make jet engines, but those jet engines, instead of being strapped to jets, are actually bolted to the ground. And so they'll power generators, or they'll power gas compressors or pumps or other things, other rotating machinery. And so, but the same concepts apply. It's pretty much the same engine with some minor tweaks here and there. Not the same engine, but like it's a jet engine. And so he was like, what do you think about coming to a summer internship? And I was like, sure, why not? We're at a
Mhm.
Christmas party. I just met you. Like, you're being really nice. So then
Mhm.
a few months go by, and like I'm still working at SDSU. And he calls me up out of the blue. He's like, hey, you still want a summer internship? And I was like, yeah, that would be awesome.
Mhm.
So I go to Solar and I have a summer internship. And so it goes really well, in my opinion. And at the end, like my boss's boss's boss comes over and he says, "What's your plan for the future?" And I said, "Well, I'm finishing up my master's degree, and my plan is to go to Cornell because they have a really good applied math PhD, and they have a kind of a feeder system into Wall Street, and so that's where
Mhm.
I'm wanting to go." And so that was all still like, trying to use the finance background, and that was the plan.
Is
And
that
I
the
had been watching.
terminology used, a feeder system? I never knew that. I never knew that was an accepted jargon for a university that would just kind of be a hopper for industry X. You just,
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
mean, okay, it
They
makes
just need,
sense.
yeah, like their placement of graduates to Wall Street was really high, like very commendable.
I thought
And
that
so
was
I,
kind of an embarrassing thing, Cody, to characterize the university as a feeder. I don't know. I'm
I hope
obviously.
I didn't just offend a bunch of people at Cornell. I look at it as a positive thing, and hopefully they do too.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
it is. Yeah.
but that was my plan, and that's what I told them. And so they said, well, we have an alternative option. And I'm like, okay, what do you have in mind? And so at that point they said, what if you stay on and you instead go to UCSD, and we will fund your PhD? And so at that point I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting idea. What would I be doing? And that's where they said, you'd be doing mechanical engineering, control theory, and you could do optimization as well. And, there's take a look, think about it, let us know what you want to do. So, I came back and I talked it over with my wife, who was not my wife at that time, but I was
Mm,
pretty sure she was going to be.
mm,
And so, we're talking about plans and, staying here and versus trying to move to upstate New York. And it seemed like a really good opportunity to stay here with solar. And then they were talking about, we'll even give you some time off to make sure you can take classes and, do all your homework and all your research. Um, and, there's a certain level of expectation for the work that you have. But if you're willing to try to balance it all, like, we'll basically foot the bill.
mm.
And I was like, in the end, after talking it over, it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. So that reoriented me away from finance and into the whole world of gas turbines and energy. And so at that point, that's when I started taking classes at UCSD and starting the PhD formally. And, many years later, graduate. And that was in 2020. So right at the right in the middle of COVID. And since then, I've been at Solar just working full time.
I mean, was the I'm thinking like your job, your potential job could have been this glamorous Wall Street banker, making many multi-million dollars, and then you're here at a mechanical company, I remember it just kind of occurred to me like one time I'd taken my mom. I was working on this problem where the sensors were failing on our loaders, and my mom happened to visit from India, and so I'd taken her to this site where we had to collect some data, whatever. So Caterpillar sites, they're not the most glamorous places in the world. There was a quarry pit somewhere in the outskirts of Chicago. So I take her there, and then I did whatever I had to do. And as I was riding back in the car, she says to me, "I will find you something glamorous to do." So in her mind, she's thinking, "Oh my God, what is my poor son gotten into," and things like that. But
oh, that's great.
yeah.
To your point, I mean, it's it's the life that didn't get lived, right? And
yeah. I was going to ask you, what do you think about, like, so you've been with Solar for so long, and do you ever think, this is a question, this is something that I hear from my friends, and you see it out in the play out in quite, this is again a tangent here, but what do you think when you have the fork in the road to work in a large corporation where you've got these kind of, you've got the burden of legacy, maybe, and then you've got this big bureaucracy where to innovate, maybe it's not in your company, but and then you've got the opportunity to work on startups and disrupt the next big thing. What is your general philosophy on that? Like, what do you think about? I know you work on a startup on the side, but what do you think? I mean, can you be in a large company and be the outstanding kind of disruptor that the ideas that you have? Is that even possible? Because I've been at CAT for many years now, and this is one of the things I get from when I talk to other people outside, is that what are you doing not getting into a startup or something like that and disrupting the next thing? You understand then there's all these kind of like barriers put in place, or maybe there's a lot of inertia and stuff like that. So I don't know what your thoughts are in that space.
It's been my experience that to make big movements in the big corporate world, you often need a champion, and that champion is almost always going to be someone that's much higher up than you, like that kind of is almost like a mentor or champion, right? And they provide an avenue for you to be able to try to disrupt. And like, you talk about inertia, and like, I think you start to build momentum if you have that, and if you can come up with something interesting that is disruptive, and then if you can get other people to buy in, and if you can kind of start to amass that momentum, right? And like, so a lot of things have to go right, but I think that's also true of a startup, right? Like, you start with an idea, or somebody starts with an idea, and you've got to have this agglomeration of things and factors before it ever picks up any steam and has any momentum. And then you need more and more and more, and like, many of the dominoes have to fall before it's ever going to be something. I mean, most startups fail. I think everybody knows that. It's well documented. And for the same idea, most ideas fail too, in a big corporate bureaucracy, because it's just so difficult to get it to the finish line, and it takes perseverance, luck, help, at a minimum, in my opinion. And so, I mean, it's possible, certainly, and I think I've seen people do it, and I'm sure people are doing it right now. And clearly, we're coming off of like record time for startups, at least in America, because of the low interest rates and just everybody trying to, COVID, I think, pushed a lot of people to question their jobs and actually go to startups, which is, great in some sense. Like, yeah, go out and do whatever is going to make you happy, and like try new things. And, we're seeing all kinds of disruptions all over, right? I mean, one of the best examples is Tesla and Elon Musk, right? With electric cars. And yeah, like, I think that that's a great culture to have. Like, as humans, we get to push each other, and we get to try to push the boundaries. And I think most of the time that goes well. Certainly there are examples where it doesn't go well and it's not a good thing. But the optimist in me likes to think that that is a good thing. And you got to try, and you got to go for it.
Yeah, and to your, I guess, earlier point that you could also achieve that kind of big disruptive things in being in a large corporation, and it would require you to have your champions, your allies, and you would have to build momentum, and then you have to sell the idea, and these things have to come together, and then you could, it also, I guess, goes without saying that you also have to have the kahunas, the stamina, and the charisma to some degree to sell the idea to the upper management,
Yeah,
right? It's not just engineering excellence
absolutely.
at that point.
No, yeah, you have to put your sales hat on. You have to convince people. I mean, you have to wear all the hats, like just like you would in a startup, right? Like to really push that idea through, especially if it's a big disruptive idea that's going to require people to do things that is not the standard way. You got to really convince them, I think, and that's hard. Like that's hard for anybody.
How did you
Um,
develop that salesman capability, or did you develop that?
well, it's a good question, and it's hard to grade myself on my salesmanship ability.
Yeah.
I think it gets better with time, and like with anything, I'm a very firm believer. The more you do it, the more problems you try to solve. And when I say problems to solve, like I mean that very generally, right? Like the
Hmm.
more times you give presentations to people that are neutral or against you, right? Like, and who are going to fight back a little bit and try to poke holes in your ideas and your disruptive thought, it's good. Like you learn from that and you get better and you understand, like, maybe somebody does find a hole that you have to go back and fix. But if not, you learn how to deal with, like these more negative people that don't want change and want to just kind of conserve the system. And, it spans the whole spectrum. Like sometimes there are good reasons not to change. Sometimes there are very good reasons to change. And you get kind of this panoply of thoughts and ideas and emotions from all of these people that you have to interact with to sell the whatever it is you're trying to sell. And I think the more you do that, the better you become at handling that, understanding how to filter it. Sometimes you find common threads of things that you should think about well before you put this in front of somebody. And I think that's helpful. So I think, I guess what I'm saying, simply said, is experience, right? You build experience, and that experience will make you better in time.
But you also have to, like you're saying, you also have to have the drive. Of course, you need a drive. You need the drive regardless of a corporate environment, I mean, of a,
Yeah,
a
I would say that
legacy.
that's like a necessary condition, right? Like if you're not driven, then it seems unlikely that you're going to be finding yourself in that disruptive situation.
You have to be, well, in that kind of a big corporation too, you have to be sort of an outlier in terms of how you present yourself, how you sell yourself. You can't just, I'm going to put a slide pack together and I'm going to lay out all these points of the benefits of my idea. It also has to, there's a lot of perseverance involved. You also have to have this kind of salesmanship way to talk to people. How am I going to present it in a way that's palatable? It's attractive, and people really see my point of view. And I guess why I'm bringing this up is that um, I do sense that, I don't know what your belief is, that's kind of few and far between in my opinion. At least I've been in only one major corporation. That kind of like salesmanship and the perseverance and the resilience to stick through, people not believing in you, and the naysayers come out of the woodwork all the time. It takes a lot out of you. You're not just doing engineering at that point. You're wearing multiple hats and you're working hard at each one of them.
Mm.
That's fascinating. Do you by the way, you've had this kind of like math, physics, finance, and all of that. Do you see, I mean, I'm sure you have, but do you have certain common threads you pull out from each one of these abstract ideas out? Is there something conscious that you look at this? Like, is this part of your kind of portfolio of tools that you use in your day-to-day work, intellectually speaking? Or is this just kind of natural to you? I'm just like, I think logically, I get after problems and I solve it. And I don't know why I'm asking this question. I don't know. I feel like this is a much less like talked about phenomenon in that you know, people who spend time like playing multiple instruments, let's say in a band, they kind of understand the abstract nature of everything. There's an abstract intelligence associated with everything, right? And you say, okay, if I know how to play this, I probably know how to play this, and I probably know how to play that. And then do you see that as I mean, of course you see it as an advantage, but do you have anything to say in that space?
I think that people who excel in their craft get to that point. And I think, you know, it may start that way for some. I don't think it started that way for me. Like, it took a lot of hard work, and it took a lot of beating my head against the books to really understand it. So I'll give you a case in point. So I go back to calculus, because I think for anyone who's gone through calculus can appreciate this idea. So I think there are like three major steps in one's understanding of mathematics as they go. And that's if you go to a high enough level. So the first step is when you get rid of numbers in grade school or wherever that happens, and you are introduced to algebra. So now these letters come in and they're variables, and like that is a hard concept if you've never been introduced to it before, right? Like it takes time to like understand what that means, and like a lot of people never get to that point. Like they just struggle, and it just never clicks with them. Okay, so let's say you make it past that point. The next big point, in my opinion, is going from like that level to geometry, where now you have to link logical statements to do these proofs, right? Like, you know, a proof, oh, these angles are congruent. And how do you actually prove that? And it's like, that's such a foreign concept. What do you mean proof? And, you know, now you're starting to formalize logic, right? And I think that is also a big, giant leap for people. And a lot of people don't really ever get past that. So let's assume that they keep going. Now you come up against calculus. And so now all of a sudden you're talking about things that are no longer static, but they're dynamic. And, you know, these variables are representing sequences or limits, and like the whole concept of limits, that is, again, like a major leap, I think, in like what truly is a derivative or an integral. Like those are leaps of understanding. And I think they're major leaps in like the way you think. And then eventually, you know, you get to the last big leap is like learning how to write proper proofs in mathematics, and like what that actually means to prove a statement compared to just solving a problem. And so, you know, you get these big leaps. And so, okay, so let me go back to a story I had. When I was first taking calculus, it took me, it was weird. It was the weirdest thing. And it was like the first 3 weeks, like they're talking about derivatives and like, I'm just, and limits, sorry, they were talking about limits. And like, it is not clicking with me. I don't understand the concept. And like, it's just, I'm like, okay, I got to keep at it. I got to keep at it. Like, it's going to click. It's going to click. At some point, it's going to make sense to me. And it took 3 weeks leading up to the first test. And I was freaking out because like, I was like, I don't understand this. And I've reached my fundamental roadblock in my mind. I'm not going to be able to go any further. Like, I'm screwed. And then one day it just made sense. Like all of a sudden it was like the dominoes fell, and it was like that aha moment. It finally made sense to me. And so it like, the reason I bring up that anecdote is because I don't think, at least for myself, it wasn't like just always natural. Like, oh, boom, it's there. It makes sense. It's perfect. Like there was a struggle. There was a big struggle. There was a lot of self-doubt. And it was just that perseverance that you were referring to earlier that I think is the only reason I got there. And I think, you know, I'm a firm believer. I'm going to go off on a tangent here for just a moment.
Sure,
I'm a very firm believer that anybody can do anything given enough time and enough desire or interest. Now, enough time, it could take 1,000 years. So that might not be true for a lifetime, right? Like if you were given, if somebody's given 1,000 years and they were really wanted to understand quantum mechanics, you know, that might be enough for them. Whereas other people, it might be a few years. And, you know, it kind of depends on your abilities and whatnot. But I do think everybody could do everything given enough time. And we'll say a finite amount of time so that we don't get into the problem of infinity.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that like everybody can do everything in a lifetime. And I think that's an important distinction. So I do think, like some people, it just comes naturally and certain things come naturally, and that's awesome. Super talented people, great for them. I don't think that is necessarily me. I think that it takes hard work. And I think a lot of us, it takes hard work, but eventually you get these economies of scale, as they say. And like things, whether you're consciously seeing it or not, things are starting to work abstractly in your mind. And like those connections are being made, those neurons are firing in ways that are similar for other types of problems. And like you see those patterns, right? And that's where things start to become easier and more natural, even though they're getting harder and harder. And from an outside point of view, it looks like, oh man, they're doing something brilliant. And it's just insane how well they can do it. But for their point of view, it's like, I've been doing this for so long, it's like I'm doing the same thing over and over with slight variation. And so I'm already good at it because I've got so much experience at it. And, it goes back to that whole, there's, I think, a book about, how it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
That thing?
Yep.
Okay. And I definitely agree with that. I don't know if 10,000 is the right number, but I think it's a pretty large amount of time invested. And once you get to that point of like continuing to hone your craft, whatever it may be, like it does become easier in the sense that like subconsciously everything knows what to do. And so your ability to pick up other similar aspects or applications is now much easier than it would be for somebody starting out. And I think, it's that economies of scale. Like once you get there, it opens up a lot of doors. That's my thought.
Yeah. So going back to your point that, you were struggling for 3 weeks and your test was coming up and something was not clicking, you had the maturity to think, I'm going to really understand this and get this, but you could have just rote memorization. You could have done that. And you had the maturity to think, well, the reason why I'm saying this, because I was that guy. I would be the rote memorization guy. I would just lazily memorize the formula and then just put it in, like, fill in the blocks and just go through the motions. Like, why?
Right.
How did you choose the path of, like, was it always like, were you a very conscientious person, like, to begin with? I am the lazy idiot walking around just like, how did you have, is it like, that's the question I really like. I always find it fascinating when I talk to folks who've graduated from American universities. I find that, I come across engineers because I work in an engineering firm. I find it fascinating that, that's a common thread I see, is that folks will say, you got to understand things and it has to make sense to you. I know that making sense is a part of the American Enlightenment and all of that stuff, which is a fascinating topic for me. And I love that stuff. But for you personally, how did you have that maturity to say, all right, I need to really get this, or was it just kind of, hey, I was born in California, my parents are awesome, I had a great, this is how it works, I have to understand everything fundamentally? I don't know.
There might be some of that in there. I think a large portion of it, at least at the time for me, was desperation. I was desperate to prove myself and to prove to others that like I could think rationally and intelligently about mathematics, right? And prove it to myself. Like there was a big portion of like, I was, at that point I harbored the same idea that like calculus is like a big blockade for a lot of people. Like that's where a lot of people just stop with math because they just never really understand and internalize those concepts. And maybe they do some memorization and get through the class, but like they never really got it. It never really made sense. And I was determined to really understand it. And I think where that came from was because I had a concrete example of what I wanted out of it. And I think this is also why I think I did, fairly well in school, especially in postgraduate stuff, because I had the context and I had the life experience that a lot of students just don't have yet. And, when you take time in between graduating from high school to go to college, and then if you continue on between college and going to like postgraduate, it's, you gain perspective that you don't have if you just go right into the next one, right?
Hmm.
And that perspective, in my opinion, is like application, right? Like you
Hmm.
have one, you want it a little bit more, like there's a reason to go back, as opposed to it's just what everyone else is doing,
Right.
right? Like, and so now you want it a little bit more. There's a little more, you've got a little more skin in the game, so to speak. But then the second thing is, and going back to your question about the calculus, there was an application. Like I wanted to apply this to finance, and I wanted to better understand some of the stuff I was reading in the CFA exam, in the CFA curriculum, to like really understand like what are these economists that are writing about these regression models and stuff like that. Like what are they actually talking about? Why does this work? Why do I have to care about partial derivatives for optimality? Blah blah blah. What the hell is a derivative?
Hmm.
Right? And so, you know, I had like, there was an eye on a prize kind of a deal. Like I wanted to know, like, why does this matter? Why does this tell me this solution is better than that solution? And what does that all mean? And so that was like, you know, that's where that desperation came from, is I have to understand this to be able to understand the concepts I really care about. And I think that drove it, or at least I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, and so that is a segue into what I was going to say, actually, because I often think that, this is a realization in retrospect, but still, I best understand a concept when, I kind of learn backwards. It's an odd kind of way of understanding, where I see the final product and then I say, okay, let me just dive into the final product, how it's put together, and then I work my way back, step by step into the ingredient parts, and it's some way it meets in the middle, where I understand the core concept. Like, for example, if I had to learn something in geometry or something, like, it's probably hard to find out an example here, but um, you know, um, even like F is equal to MA or something like that. Like, not that's not a good example, but I guess the example I'm trying to pull is that the concept doesn't sit well with me until I've understood the end application. The end application really kind of precipitously makes me understand something so quickly. Like, I'm like, oh, that's why I have to learn this, rather than if I'm hitting my head against like a theorem or a concept or a formula or something like that. It just seems very dry and drab to me in that sense. And I don't know how much you think about that. Like, I feel like that is an innovation that even in my most recent job, when I was trying to learn a whole bunch of new things, and it's always like, when people would get into the nuts and bolts and the kind of the incremental pieces of where I have to get to, I'm always like, why don't you just show me what the big picture is, and then I'll kind of understand what this component is going to do in that big picture. So then I can understand. I'll have a lot more invested emotionally, so to speak. I don't know what you think about that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, I like the backwards way. So if, for example, if somebody told me, like, hey, you have to learn, you have to, this is a car and I have to estimate the speed. So you might want to understand what velocity is. Velocity is distance over time, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, you have to learn distance over time equals velocity, and it's a measure of this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So I'm in full agreement with you. I think it's really good to have applications in mind that
Yeah.
are of interest, so that you have that bird's eye view of like, I want to solve this problem, but I don't have all of the tools I need to solve that problem yet. Like,
Yeah.
I want to have a really nice house, but I can't build that house unless I start to learn about concrete foundations and how to put up walls and how to plumb and do electric and whatever else goes into house building. Like you're going to need all of those bits and pieces. And to be able to get that final product that you really want, and that's like the valuable thing to you, yeah, like I think it helps significantly to have that in your mind's eye as you're going through,
Hmm.
kind of slogging through the technical bits of it to get to that end goal. And I would say I'm the same way in that respect as you. Like, even in some
Okay.
of the math books, having an idea of like where they're going, because you mentioned theorems, and something that I think a lot of people look at as really dry is like just doing math for math's sake, which is what you do a lot of in applied math and in pure math, right?
Mm.
And so, but like the same concept applies. And so like one example would be, you know, like when they're going through proofs of trying to get to showing that the rational numbers are countable versus the real numbers being irrational and not countable, right? Like even something as esoteric and not connected to anything physical as that, you can
Mhm.
still have that kind of same application. Like, hey, we're going to show this set of numbers can be counted versus this other set can't be counted. It can't be ordered and counted. And like just having that kind of a context
Yeah.
as you're slogging through these individual theorems of like, why are we talking about these weird sets and doing this and doing that, blah, blah, blah. I think it really does help. Or at least that's my perspective. It helps
So,
me. And
so I'd say Cody supports the idea of inverting the whole education system. We should first learn about the things that we, the
I think
problems and the.
like, okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to do a shameless endorsement of this book.
Please do.
So as far as the education system goes, and as far as how things should be taught, especially like this is specific to math, but I think it can
Okay.
easily be extended to many areas.
Mm.
Is, you know, George Pólya, if I'm saying his name correctly, was a really good mathematician at the turn of the century. And he wrote down, you know, how he thinks. It's a book about thinking, and it's a book about
Oh,
teaching.
wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I think you'd probably really enjoy it. And
Yes.
I'd love to hear your comments on it.
Yeah.
But how to solve it. And he talks about what you just said, kind of inverting everything and like prodding the students with an application and like an idea of like, here's why we care about this. Here are some connections to other things. And like, how do you start to kind of build something that they can visualize from just, you know, a problem and get them interested and make them invested in it so that they do want to learn the technical details, you know. And it's kind of very much along what we're talking about. And I think that's one aspect that really can help draw students in, but it takes a good teacher that cares to be able to do that, you know, and to kind of make those applications, because an application that you and I might see and be interested in, this other student over here might not care about that at all. And so we need to find the application that they care about as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe you use the same tools to solve the problems, but they might be completely different application areas. And like, it's important to, you know, have some diversity in the application areas too. And
yeah,
I
think that, I mean, there's so many, what's that? Sorry.
I said maybe I'm rambling at this point, but
no. I'm so in agreement with you, Cody. I'm so eager to say something, so I talk over you.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, like I mean, even the example, like I mean, another personal anecdote I should say is that, I mean, there's many of these where, I mean, Peter Thiel, like you've probably heard of Peter Thiel, the great Silicon Valley investor. Thiel Capital and all of that. Like, I don't know if you've heard of his name at all. He says
heard his name, but I didn't know who he was.
Okay. He's author of a few books, and people would consider him a contrarian. That would be a very mild term to put to describe him. But anyway, he uses one of his like famous quotes is that, you know, people who really want to learn are autodidacts. And I truly believe that. Like when I internalized that point, like when I learned to play basketball, I first went to basketball, I guess, camp when I was in my middle school. And you started off with just like, you had to dribble the ball in one place. You just stood there, you split your legs, and then you just bent down and you just kind of did this for like, oh my God, it was excruciating. I'm thinking like, when are we gonna, you know, play the game and have fun? And then, you know, of course I didn't follow through with it. But then when I was 18, it so happened that I got a basketball. My uncle bought me one, and then I just started shooting and I started playing. And before I knew it, I was loving it. I developed my own style of playing. And then I went back and learned, okay, this is a layup, this is a jump shot, and this is posting up. And I was already doing many of these things in a very unrefined way. And I mean, I was playing competitively. I loved the game, and people wanted me on their pickup game, you know, teams and all of that stuff. And I came to America and I played intramural at CAT, loved it. Like,
Nice.
entirely self-taught. I mean, this is not me bragging. I'm just kind of making the point that it's just kind of learning things backward. You're teaching yourself, but you're teaching yourself what's necessary. You're not just going through the kind of the dogged steps of every, like, I got to learn how a dribble is done for the next 20 days. Like, I'm just going to refine my dribbling. It's like, no, thank you. I don't want to play the damn game. My mother-in-law also she's a musician, and she tells me, I was trying to learn an instrument. It's one of the advice she gave me is just, and I was trying to learn tabla, which is an Indian percussion instrument. And I was, again, the same deal. Like, you learn this one beat for like 3 classes, and it was just like, God, this is so stifling. I feel like I just want to play and just make maybe noise, and then maybe some rhythm comes out of it. I'll get better at it. And then she gave me the advice, and I never followed it, but it made a lot of sense. She said, and this is a person who's, she played in a band professionally, and she plays multiple instruments. She's very talented. She's like, just play, have fun, let it sound good to you or bad to you. And then eventually when you're having fun, it's kind of self-perpetuating. You would pick up on it, and then you would kind of, you will be automatically motivated to learn on your own. You will go after the knowledge on your own. And I just loved it. Anyway, that's my soapbox. Sorry, Cody. I just love that way of learning.
I think, yeah, I think for sure it's a great way to stoke interest and develop that desire to keep going, because like for a lot of things, there are formalities that can help, right? Like, that's the whole reason that we write things down and that we've done well as a species, is because we can pass on lessons learned from previous generations. And, you brought up the musician, right? One of the things I would speak to on that, like I'm currently learning the piano. Okay. And like, it's like you want to play and you want it to sound good, but there are certainly like the right way. There's a easy way and a hard way to play many pieces, right? And like you get these when you're reading the sheet music, like they'll tell you what fingers should hit what notes, because that's like most natural for most people. Now, it doesn't mean that it's the right way. It's just most people prefer that way. And so to your point, like you developed your own way to play basketball. And I think that is fantastic. Like your body is responding to your joy and your excitement for this game. And you're like just figuring it out on your own. Like your brain's just cranking
You're getting
the
dopamine hits. Yeah.
And like, that's a awesome way to learn something new and actually like enjoy it while you're doing it. And so, if ever you wanted to go back and get coached up by an NBA star, you could, and they'll probably teach you something you don't know. But, you got everything you wanted out of it, right? Like that's what it sounds like. And so I think that's wonderful. And it reminds me of a quote. So you brought up Einstein at the very beginning. Yeah. And he's got
I love your hair, by the way. I didn't mean to ever bring it up.
I have a love-hate relationship with it, and a lot of it's falling out. So I can love-hate it right now, and then eventually it'll just be gone.
It looks great, man.
Thanks. But he said, among many of the quotes that he has, and this is in his book, Ideas and Opinions, but he says, reading after a certain age, it will, and I'm paraphrasing, but reading after a certain age will divert the mind from critical thinking. And I think that he said that, he meant it the way he said it, but I think also it can be interpreted very vaguely and generally. Like if you only are doing what's told to you from the books or the authorities or the experts, at some point, you cross that threshold where you stop learning from just your own kind of self-learning, like point, and your experiences and trying new things, and like that creative spark that you have, like you said, going to basketball or going to music or problem solving or whatever it may be. I think all of us have our own creative spark that will propel us in ways that would not be the same as somebody else. And we have a certain formalism to kind of guide that and to help that, but like at some point it's that creative piece that really moves things forward. And I think that's a big part of genius from that point of view, is like there's some creative spark that they see something that nobody else sees, and it's that creative link. And like I think that's also part of it for like entertainers and athletes at the top of their game. Like there's some creative piece there that the rest of us just don't have. And there's also, you know, like the hard work and the perseverance,
Right.
and it's so many things that go into that. But like, I think a big part of it is that creativity. And I think if, you know, if we don't go out and do these things and have fun with them, and if we only are going off of like what we're told to do, it, like that little creative spark just starts to die out until it eventually extinguishes. And like at that point, yeah, you just don't have it anymore. And so I love your story about basketball and how you taught yourself, and you did it from the joy of it and the want and the desire. Like
Right.
that's that creative spark, and that's such an important thing to have.
Yeah. Speaking about Einstein, I was tying it back to your earlier breakthrough moment that you were talking about, like the 3-week period where you didn't get the breakthrough and then you got it eventually. I think again, this is a story I'm probably butchering, but one of the stories I think I read it recently is that even his whole thought experiment about the special relativity, you know, the ray of light, riding on the beam of light and looking back at the clock, that whole thing was a product of his, like, kind of, you know, the subconscious, the quiet mind. It was not like a conscious, it was not conceived of in a conscious state. It was something that he was doing otherwise, and then that kind of abstract imaginative thought experiment came to his mind, and it was just like, it was just that creative spark that came out. It was not something that you're sitting down and, you know, systematically deriving that this is the thought experiment I want to put out there. So
Cool.
anyway,
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
anyway, I was going to say, I want to be sensitive to your time too. It's we're coming up on 2 hours somewhere here, and I could go on here talking about things. You're obviously very interesting. Let me know when you have to bail out, or we can bail out right now if you want.
Well, I could go for another 8 minutes if you want to, or we could bail out. And you know, if you find our conversation good, we can always have another one down the road.
Yes. We talked about California a little bit. I always wanted to ask you this question, Cody. You've grown up in California, right?
Mhm.
So, and in San Diego specifically, which I imagine there's a subculture in San Diego that you won't find in LA or San Francisco, or I don't know.
There's definitely a like Northern California versus Southern California. There's definitely a cultural change between
Okay.
those two.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been meaning to ask a Californian this question, a true Californian who's born and raised there. What is it about California that makes it so distinct from the rest of the United States? Like, do you have any intuitions on that? Like, why is that place so prolific in terms of innovation and all of these? I mean, one of my father-in-law, I'm married to an American, so her dad's American, obviously, and he was telling me, like, one of the things they would say in the 70s was it always started in California and then the rest of the country got it. And I guess I was curious about that. Like, what is it about California, or the culture, or is it the hippie culture, or whatever it is? Can you kind of describe to me what that is? Do you have an intuition about that at all?
You know, this is my own perspective and my
Yes,
alone.
please,
And
please. Yes.
there are probably plenty of people that will disagree with me, but I think, you know, my best guess is being on, you know, like we have some of the best beaches in the world,
Mm,
and we're coastal. And I think just as if you grow up here or if you live here, a big draw of coming here is my guess. If somebody's coming here, moving here, is because of the beaches, and it's because of that culture that you find in a beach community. Like, I don't know what exactly it is, but it's very laid back and it's very chilled out. And you know, like you see it on so many of the towns that you see going up the coast. And I think that there's I don't know, maybe just a certain like ease that comes along. Like, it doesn't mean that you're lazy. It doesn't mean that you're not wanting to do big things. Obviously, like big things come out of different parts of California, like you said.
mm-hmm,
But I do think that there's like this kind of like beachy, chill, for lack of a better term,
mm-hmm.
culture of like, you know, we can be laid back and we can still do a lot of great things. And then, you know, you've got Hollywood and a lot of those people, like performers and actors and actresses. I think that they also have that kind of a culture of like, you know, it's very laid back. Like, I can take myself seriously. I can produce all this great work. but I can also like be caught at the beach and just enjoying my life and like having fun. And, I think back for anybody that's a bodybuilding buff, back in the day with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and like
Yeah.
when he was in his Mr. Olympia time, there would be these pictures of him on the beach posing and like people coming up and checking him out. And then his like main competitor, Lou Ferrigno, down in a basement in New York. And it was like gritty and hard and rough and cold. And like,
Right.
it was just that juxtaposition, and like that California magic is like that, the summer, that sun-kissed, I don't know, land or beach or whatever you want to call it. But like, there's something about it. There's just a different mood here than there is in a lot of places.
It seems counterintuitive though, right? Because it's like, how could you be chill and also be driven to build products and have the drive to innovate and all of that? Like it seems like most often you hear the stories that the greatest things come out of hardships, and then you know there's scarcity, there's all of this other stuff, and then what you're saying is quite antithetical in that sense that you have this kind of chill attitude, but you also have this kind of like confidence that you could get big things done. Maybe it attracts a certain kind of group of people that to this place. I don't know. I was visiting a company recently in California, and they're a major kind of like eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff landing startup, and they were right away from the beach. There was this amazing kind of view about the beach, and there was a landing strip, and there was planes taking off and all of that stuff. And as I entered this place, it just kind of hit me hard, because there was the workplace was so inspiring. They had the airplane sitting there, the people were working on it, they were chilled out. And then there were all these guys with their computers and laptops. But then you just look out the window, and then there was just amazing, like scenery sort of look at. And I don't know. It's just like, it seems counterintuitive to me that just to give you an idea, like the place I work at, it's just a brown wall in front of you, and it's brown walls everywhere. like how, and that's the thing that's supposed to drive you, is like the sterile environment to work in, and no plants and no greenery. Like that's when you're not going to get distracted, man. You're not going to see the sunlight, and you're not going to think. Like that's I guess the mentality is that if you're not distracted by those natural elements, you're just going to focus and do the work. Whereas what you're saying is, it's like you could have the cake and eat it too. You could have this amazing lifestyle you could live, but you could roll your sleeves up and just create the next big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And like you mentioned, weather, for example, like when it's hard to beat the weather in the coast of California, right? Like it's pretty mild, it's pretty nice. And when you don't have to worry about tornadoes or hurricanes or flooding or snowstorms or all of these different things, we do have to worry about fire these days. But for the most part, only a few times during the season do you have to really worry about fires. The rest of the year, you're pretty mellowed out. And like, I don't know, maybe, if we have just a certain capacity to care about various elements of life, maybe part of it is that because we don't have to care so much about these things, like in our immediate living
survival.
Environment, survival, like we can kind of explore other areas or have a little bit more capacity to do so compared to others. I don't know. That's, just a shot in the dark, but maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure.
No, I thank you for, all of that is good information. Like it all makes sense, right? Like if your basic needs, Maslow's, hierarchy and all of that stuff, you apply there. It's like, yeah, you guys are blessed with just everything good in that part of the land. And
it is, other than we are starting to run out of water, so that's not great.
All right, Cody. I think I could go on and on, and I'd written down all of these things I wanted to talk to you about. Of course, we can have a follow-up discussion. This is always a pleasure, man.
Let's do it.
I appreciate you giving your valuable time. I really, really am thankful for that.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being on the podcast. Or it's a podcast, right?
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I think you're doing something really cool here. So thank you for inviting me. And if you think that it would be fun, let's do another one.
Yes, absolutely. It would be my honor and privilege to have you back on. Thank you. Appreciate it. Cheers.
All righty.